There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to tonight's edition of Grumpy Old Men here at Sydney Whisky Forum. No, I lie, we are getting back to one of the greatest traditions of the Sydney Whisky Fair week that for the past 2 years has been done virtually. This is Tim Duckett's Trails Through Tasmania. My name is Scott Fitzsimons. Look after all the whisky and spirits here at the Oak Barrel, which includes Sydney Whisky Fair / Sydney Whisky Forum. And it's my great pleasure to welcome back into the Oak Barrel, albeit through virtual circumstances, Mr. Tim Duckett from the Heartwood and Tasmanian Independent Bottlers bottling lines, who every Wednesday in the lead up to fair will come down, bring some bottles with him and talk about the state of the scene and what the future looks like and where we've been while we drink some pretty special stuff. And for the last couple of years, he's brought along an old mate of his, Bill Lark, who I believe is not sitting on the same couch as Tim this year because he's on holidays again at the family retreat. Is that correct, Bill?
It is tonight, yes, and then we're heading further up the east coast. But I don't want to talk about that to everybody in Sydney tonight.
Yeah, excellent. And Tim, you're in the Bond store tonight, mate.
Mate, that's why the beagle's on, because it's cold down here. It's Tasmania.
I had to escape Hobart because I didn't want to be on the same couch with Tim again. He got us into trouble last time. I thought I'll just separate myself a little bit and we'll keep it sane.
All right, Bill, I've got a story for you then, right?
Go on.
If Collingwood were to play St Kilda at the moment, you know what the result would be? A 0-0 draw.
I'm not going to argue with you, Tim.
It's been bloody hopeless. Sorry. Have we taken off and gone the wrong direction, Scott?
No, that's what I normally get told off for bringing football and sporting references into these sorts of things. Last night I got told off, in fact, for talking about the mighty Sydney Swans. So it's good that someone else brought it up, and I can lay the blame at them.
Yeah, exactly.
Shout out to Tom Scott watching on the YouTube there, coming in live from Melbourne, who was also in lockdown. As you can tell from my haircut, yes, if you're watching this back in 5 years' time, we're in lockdown right at the moment. And I think as soon as this series of forum events is over, I'm getting the clippers out, and it's going to go. And
any hair is good hair. Come on.
Yeah. I can recommend a good barber too.
Yes.
Beautiful. Well, I mean, Bill, you just put your head on upside down again tonight.
I just go for spit and polish these days.
Yeah, I can't grow it up there, so I'm growing it down here.
Yeah.
Actually, my eldest son, George, he said, we're having a drink at a place called the Gold Bar in town, and he said to me, I'm drinking with Louis, I'm drinking with George. He said, you know what we look like? And I said, what's that, mate? He said, we look like an open carton of eggs. Oh, yeah, okay. Bread true, at least, anyway.
Very good.
Excellent. So, look, thank you, Tim, for curating a bit of a tasting playlist for us tonight. As you sort of touched upon before we went live, it is chapters in tonight's story, so to speak. We are going to focus on Tasmanian whiskey. We do have some non-Tasmanian whiskey as well that we're going to take a look at, but I've just posted the lineup tonight and the order into the various comment sections. So play along if you've got that pack. If you're lucky enough to grab a pack, if they sold out before, you could grab one. Don't worry, drink along, grab something off your back bar, and we can have a bit of a chat. But we started and finished last year's chat by talking about where Tasmania was and sort of how it's been. We still are yet no closer to confirming whether COVID is a Tasmanian conspiracy to keep mainlanders away. Still, that hasn't been properly debunked. But there was a brief period there where tourists could come back, Australian tourists could come back to Tassie, and I know certain distilleries rely upon that. What's the past 12 months been for the Tassie industry as you guys have seen it?
Bill, you go with this one, particularly since you were involved with Old Captain, and they're right on the tourist route, so that's probably good.
Yeah, look, I think distilleries that had cellar doors suffered initially, but I think it's fair to say that nearly all of those distilleries quickly reacted to the situation and immediately worked on their social media and online presence. And, I'm pleased to say for those Tasmanian distilleries, they've actually done quite well in terms of online sales. But there are people in the industry that have been affected, sadly, because we don't have mainland visitors coming down. There are whisky tour companies that had invested heavily in the industry just before this last lockdown problem we've had in the east coast of Australia. And it's really hurting them quite badly. They sort of set up with, vehicles and staff and a retail outlet, and they just got that set up, and it all came crashing down around them. So they're as much a part of our industry, an important part of our industry, as the distillers themselves, and we really feel for them. So there's some good news there, but also some bad news for us.
Yeah, there were those that relied on Salamanca market too as a main income stream, and of course, as you well know, Scotty, you're not allowed anywhere near us, as are the Victorians, and
but that wasn't because
the markets.
No, so I can blame it on a legitimate reason now, where it was previously you had to come up with excuses.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with it. We just didn't want you to come down again.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Our Premier said we had a ditch and we're not afraid to use it, so it's been kept you at bay.
Yeah, well, look, we've got a bit of whiskey to get through tonight for those playing along, so we might crack in with something. And in typical Tim Duckett fashion, we're not mucking around. We're going to do 2 new make spirits to kick off with, and then we will look at whiskies in moving in ABV. And shout out to Joey Ty down in Melbourne as well, tuning in tonight. Mike Kidd, a name I think we all know quite well, and Ollie Maruda, who's picked up his kids drinking along. So in the spirit of that kit, I think we're going to kick off with some Ovram New Make Spirit at the very nice and gentle 63.5% alcohol. Is that correct, Tim?
Yes, mate. That's to start with. I think we probably should discuss both new makes because I think what we're seeing now is the presence of a lot more peated new makes and peated whiskies becoming available in Australia. It's just part of the evolutionary process of an industry that is nearly 30 years of age, where Scotland and Ireland have been producing whiskey for, let's say, 400 years. And we're starting to produce peated whiskies. And the beauty of the new make or the peated new makes that we have is that we now have, and Bill and Lynn started it off when they started using peat from Lake Echo. And then we've had Peter Bignell using peat from his brother's property. The guys on Flinders are using local peats, and we're also seeing peated malted barley coming from New Zealand and also from Scotland. So there's quite a variety of different peat styles of new make being generated here based on a variety of peat sources. And we're still learning about those too. And because we have peated whiskies, what we've been doing is we've had the opportunity to blend some of those peated whiskies with unpeated whiskies to provide something that is unique. And I just think it's an evolutionary step in the Australian whiskey industry. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, look, you did right. And there's also other exciting things happening too. I mean, you spoke to Christy, my daughter from Kalara Distillery last night, and Christy, along with a few other distilleries, got a hold of some sensational Lafroig casks, and they've been maturing and finishing whiskies off in those casks that still pick up the most delightful peaty Lafroig notes in a whiskey that I've ever tasted. So that's quite exciting too. It's happening more and more. Of course, when Lynn and I started, we didn't intend to produce a heavily peated whiskey. It was just to give the whiskey a sweetness and a depth of character. That worked very nicely for us, and that produced what we call our classic cask. But it's exciting to see how, the Tasmanian whiskey style is developing with these peated malts that the distilleries are getting in.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Scotty.
No, you go on, Tim.
No, I've got one of those Lefroy casks here that belongs to my son Louis and his business partner Jack Lark, and the product out of that is stunning. It is absolutely stunning. The one thing that does happen, and it appears to happen even in our Bond store and other places, is that the influence of peat and smoke diminishes quite rapidly with time. It does on Isla, but not at the pace it does here. I think if we're going to produce a single malt peated whiskey of where the main influence is the peat, it's going to be of a very young age, and it'll probably be around 3-4 years of age. I've got one of my last Lark barrel, Bill. Lynn did the distillation, and it's now approaching a 10-year-old. We did the tests, the parts per million tests back in whenever 10 years ago, and it was 12 parts per million of phenolics, similar to Kilconan. And at the moment, I'm struggling to find any peat and smoke influence, apart from that sweetness that you said. But the peatiness and the smokiness have more or less disappeared. So I think if we do, as an industry, produce heavily peated whiskies, they will be quite young. I've got a musket cask that is filled with Adams peated new make, where the peat originated from the peated malt originated from Scotland. It's stunning, but the thing is, it's 18 months old. It's not a whiskey, but it is stunning. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, because we're still learning.
Well, having said that, though, Tim, I know of a number of new distilleries in Tasmania that are growing their own barley and malting it themselves, and they will be getting access to Tasmanian peat, and they are developing peat furnaces that will enable them to heavily peat smoke the malt, just as they do in Scotland. And when that happens, I think they'll be able to produce heavily peated aged whiskies. I think that is down the track for us.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. We'll look down the track, and then we'll nod sagely when we're much older. How about that?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay.
So, I mean, with all this discussion around peat, where we're talking about the spirit at this point, and for people who may not be overly familiar with this, might be their first go at tasting a new make spirit. This is the building blocks. This is as it runs off the still before it goes into a barrel. This is in its rawest and most naked form. Now, Tim, you like doing new makes on these tastings because that sort of shows, where it comes from and what you're looking for, because you do a lot of matching of barrels with new make spirit and sourcing spirit that you mature yourself. So, I mean, what is it about this Overeem spirit that entices you and makes you excited? And then on top of that, like, what sort of barrels are you seeing that this will work for? Like, what's the thought process there?
Look, I don't think much. It's not rocket science, okay? Look, it's quite simple. If you get Bill, if you get a good new make,
I'm going to quote you on that. I don't.
Yeah, I know. If you get a good new make, right, and it is a good drink, and you put it into a good barrel, you get a good whiskey, and you get it sooner. Lynn used to say, I always bow to her view, shit in, shit out. So the thing is, when you taste a new make, if it is a complete drink, because I remember Christy, again, if we talk about Kalara, some of the new make that she made 2 years ago when she was at Derwent Park there was just stunning. It was a complete drink in itself. And you put that into a good barrel, there are less volatile components. There are the whiskey losses that you would normally attribute to a mature whiskey is probably roughly 25 to 30% volume of angel share before your whiskey is mature. But if you produce a good new make and you put it into a good barrel, you get a good whiskey sooner. Therefore, you lose less volume, you make more money. And I'm down to about 12% now if I choose a good new make and put it into a good barrel. And Overeem make a good new make, Christie makes a good new make. Adams made a lovely peated new make. And you put those, as I said, into a good quality barrel. And the other thing that we've done now is every individual barrel that comes into our bond store that we are going to fill with new make, we check every individual one. And that means from staves, pulling them apart, cutting them, smelling them, getting the barrels reassembled and recoopered, and then we'll choose the spirit that goes into the barrel.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, let's reverse engineer that question then. If a good new make is a complete drink in itself and nice and clean, without naming any names, what are some highlights of bad new make spirit? Things that you go, oh, I'm not sure I want to play with that.
When you say bad, though, Scott, I don't think we shouldn't think of it sometimes as bad new make spirit. But I've had some new make spirit that you might have thought to yourself, gee, that's a bit fainty, or it has the characters of some of the fusel oils coming through. I've seen them go into barrels. I've come back to those barrels years later and absolutely no hint of those fusel oils. It's in fact produced a big, rich, oily, gutsy malt as clean as you can hope for, full of character. And so what you might see to be a bad is probably just a new make that is heavy in some of these characters that we might think we don't want in a whiskey. But by the time it's lost in the angel share and interacted with the oak and cleaned up through the charcoal layer, it can produce a really great whiskey.
I think that's an interesting point, because I remember the first time I tried Lefroy new make, to use them as an example. Yep. It wasn't a particularly pleasant drink.
No.
But they know that after 3 years in a barrel, it starts to hit that sweet spot, which is probably a good segue to bring in our second new make and encourage people to put these side by side. Certainly, you don't need to drink these all at once. These are pretty robust sort of drinks where they are. But I mean, let's try that. And in terms of then that smoke, what is it about the Adams new make that gets you excited, Tim?
Again, I like a combination of sweetness and peatiness, and it's not astringent. Some peated whiskies are quite astringent and don't flow evenly across the palate, and some are a little bit like road pavement. And Adams has this sweetness. I don't know. I mean, I've got to be careful too, and as I get older, my palate is probably not as good as it used to be, and I'm always looking for the bigger drug because my palate has been smashed from pillar to post. So the things that I look for flavour, where sometimes I'm probably looking for more the flavour than the actual spirit-driven characteristics as well. So I've got to be aware of that, and you've got to be aware of that too. So it's not what I say is not gospel. It's just how I see it, and I've got to realise that there are others out there with different palates and different opinions. But I look for sweetness and peat. That's what I look for, and length as well. And so if I've got something that's sweet, even through the palate, and has great length, I know that if I put that into a good barrel, I'm going to get a good whiskey.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it is personal preference, but and that's with something like a Heartwood or a TIB. Every time you open a Heartwood or a Tasmanian independent bottlers, you're having a drink with Tim, and now with Louis, because it's your palate that is choosing what's going into here. I mean, these are both exceptionally well put together. But I'd love to hear from anyone in the chat who maybe hasn't had a huge amount of experience with new make, just to sort of get their experience. They signed up for a whiskey tasting, and we're whacking them around at 63% at the moment. But it's funny, the Adams, the peat isn't as dominant. I find personally that the higher ABV, even with finished whiskies, I have to add water to get a lot of whiskey coming through. So I think that's an interesting point as well. I mean, when you're trying these things, will you water down your new makes?
Water's banned here at the Bond Store, mate.
Well, but
Sorry, hang on, I've given it away. But no, no, that's no. I don't water down the new makes. I taste the new makes like an Overeem. They'll let me go and look at all the different runs. I get to taste all the different runs, and now I've actually been taking a proportion, usually 70% early sweet cut, about 20% middle cut, and then 10% of a late cut run, and I mix them all together and bang them into barrels, and it just gives me what I think is a complete new make, which gives me a good whiskey sooner. There you go.
Yeah, and as Gaston points out in the chat, something I was going to read before a little bit later. I've heard that the Heartwood Bond Store is now exclusive into gin production, which sometimes can require a bit of water. So we might.
We don't put water on it either. And so just tell him he buys whiskey off me if he keeps that up. I'm not sending him any more.
This is a double jeopardy here on forum. I want to do another quick shout out to the chat. A good friend of all of ours, Andrew Young, saying g'day from the Barossa, which is I guess the second part of it, Master Cooper there. When you are sourcing barrels, like when a barrel is empty and before you've gone and put whiskey into it, how do you evaluate barrels? I mean, how you evaluate new make is pretty straightforward. You drink the stuff, and if it's good, it's good. But like, how do you look in a barrel that's just sitting there with nothing in it, whether that's going to be good or not, or do you play the lottery a little bit?
How long have we got? Okay.
Well, I'm in lockdown, so I got nowhere to be. It's only you guys that have got stuff to do potentially.
Okay. Three things I look for. There are four things I actually look for in a barrel. Three, if they are like acetone or tartaric acid, if they smell like sulfur, or if they smell mouldy, they're rejected. With Australian fortifieds, from now on, every single barrel I buy will be recoopered, and we'll pull them to bits, take the stave, go through a bandsaw or a circular saw, and then smell the stave before it's reconstructed. And we just, this is our personal preference, is just a heavy toast and heavy char. The other thing that we now look for, and it is something that I didn't realise for 5 to 10 years after we filled a barrel with spirit, is that sometimes barrels that are stored outside for a long period of time will get a black uneven stain that goes through the stave to the inside of the stave. And if we find that now, we're rejecting those too, because I had a number of whiskies that were not very good. And that's the polite way to say they weren't very good. And what I did, I got a local cooper to pull them to bits and see what was wrong with them. And we found this black stain that came through from the outside to the inside. And all of those whiskies were bitter. And the interesting thing was that I had a number of barrels, 10 barrels. I'd filled them with 1,000 litres from the one distillery. Some were absolutely brilliant and some were disgusting. And the characteristic that we could say that was consistent with the bad ones was this black staining where they'd been stored outside for too long. And maybe I don't know what the black staining is. It may be a bacterial infection. It's definitely water anyway, but we reject those now. We actually look at individual staves and they are rejected as well.
Scotty, you mentioned Youngie posted a comment a minute ago. I want to have a big shout out to Youngie. And while we're talking about barrels, I think what Tim is saying is absolutely correct, that you really have to be quite fussy with your barrel. But I think more importantly these days, you've got to develop a good relationship with your cooper. And I know a lot of new distilleries around Australia are looking to people like Youngie for advice and help. And in fact, Youngie's seen how important that is to the distillers. So I just found out today that he's been recognised by his state government in his art of coopering, and Youngie will be developing a school enabling distilleries to come to Youngie and go through the making of a barrel so that the distiller has a much better appreciation of what goes into the making of a barrel. They can then decide whether they want a heavy char or a light char or no char, what style of wood they want, what size barrel they want. You can even go to Youngie, people like Youngie, and make your own barrel. And I think as a distiller that's been in the game nearly 30 years, that's a pretty important step in understanding how whiskey and the relationship of the barrel work together. Youngie's done a lot to work with us, not just me, but the whole of the Australian industry for many, many years to fully understand what a whiskey distiller is looking for in a barrel. So I think developing that relationship is vitally important, but also I know Tim likes to sniff his butts from time to time, and that's an important thing too. You can tell a lot from sniffing your butt, Tim, can't you?
Yes, Bill. Sorry.
No, go on.
No, I got a story for you, Bill. You know, Dominic Roscoe started a new magazine in the UK.
Yes.
Okay, which is called Stills Crazy, right? So the funny thing was he wrote an article. He wrote an article about you or your family in the first version. Then he interviewed me, and in the article he said Tim Duckett is almost as well known as Bill Lark. And I go, oh, for goodness sake! And then some bright spark said to me, yeah, you're always living in Bill's shadow. And then I said to him, well, at least you can still see my head. Anyway, that was a bit of a diversion.
Yeah. It's good, and that's excellent news from Youngie, and it sounds like I swore off higher education after 1 year at university, but that sounds like this thing I might sign up for. But he doesn't know this, but I was actually planning a tasting forum around Youngie and Andrew Young and some of the casts he's gone out to distilleries. Haven't run this by him yet, but we ran out of nights in the end. But thank you, because I think I got the name for it now, Sniffing Butts with Andrew Young. I think watch this space for Whisky Forum 2022. It's coming.
I'll let you know that, mate.
And a shout out to Ian Schmitty as well from Tin Shed, who comes up with the question is, what exactly are you known for, Tim?
No. What exactly am I known for?
Yeah, known for what, Tim?
No, I've got. Hey, look, I'm known as my wife's husband. I'm known as Louis's dad. The other day down at Possum Bay where my shack is, I got an old dog. He's 17, and somebody said, "Oh, you Woody's owner?" And I've got no. I'm sorry.
I'll tell you what.
I'm known nothing. I'm just
I'll tell you what Tim's known for in Hobart. You don't go to his office on a Friday if you want to walk home. Never go to his bond store in a car because you're stuck there. That's what Tim's known for. Actually, Tim's known to be very generous with his whiskies. So we always buy a couple. We keep mine and we drink Tim's.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
He's very generous, and we appreciate it.
Look, yeah, I think it's a great pleasure. I've always said that going whiskey hunting through a barrel house or a rick house or whichever country you're in is one of the great pleasures in life. If you can blag your way into Tim's office on a Friday night, that's also one of the great pleasures in whiskey. But let's move on to try a whiskey, and from here on in, for those who have the tasting packet at home, we're going to just move purely in ABV. So start with the Larks Symphony and go up in ABV from there and talk about a few things. But interesting, Bill, what you were talking about there in terms of, Youngie being a source of knowledge for, new distilleries coming through. We were chatting just before we went live, and, we can play the game, how many distilleries are there on Isla? Because it's much easier than playing the game, how many distilleries are there in Tasmania? And we're going to, dip into the Larks Symphony, probably the, put Sullivan's Cove aside, probably the dominant name in Tassie whiskey, the most famous name. There's, 70 distilleries with whiskey ambitions?
Thereabouts? some people say 70. Somebody said the other day there's probably more like 80. A lot of little ones starting up and, quite small, but it could well be something like somewhere between 70 and 80 distillery licenses in Tasmania.
And so, I mean, so what does that look like for the Tassie whiskey scene? I mean, some of these distilleries haven't released yet, but a lot are starting to. From your, like, I'm running it around. I used to be able to try every new release that came out in Australia a few years ago. Those days are long gone. Do you want to give us the insight of like what is the style? What is the quality? Like what's happening down there? And there's obviously something in the water.
Well, look, there's a lot of things happening to the industry, and Tim alerted us all to his idea of market correction a year or so ago. I actually see there will be a market correction in terms of pricing and things. I see all that as great news for not only the consumer, but for the distillery industry. So if I was starting out today and I'm worried about, is there too many distilleries? How am I going to enter the market? I would think this market correction that Tim's talking about is probably more than just price. It's going to put downward pressure on price, I'm sure, but it'll mean that if you want to enter the market and there's still room, you're going to be required to produce a very high quality whiskey. The prices that some distilleries around Australia have been charging has been quite high, I understand. You might not be able to afford the luxury to do that in the future. That's not a bad thing. If you want to maintain a good and fair price for your whiskey, you will be required to produce high quality whiskey. And I see, as somebody who's passionate about the industry and people that are in it, I see that as great news for the consumer. There'll be downward pressure on the price, but there'll be upward pressure on the quality. And all of that, I think, will be a positive. And when you think there are 70 distilleries, even if you worked out the potential volume they're all going to be making into the future, that won't even register on a graph of the world market. So I just see the pressures coming from that as being good news for everyone. That's how I feel about it. Look, the days of being able to come on a week's holiday to Tassie and go around and taste everything that's there is not going to happen. That's good news for Tassie too. You'll have to come longer. And so I don't worry about the future. I'm quite excited about the future. The market correction that Tim's talked about, I see that it's been great news for everyone, great news for the consumer, and great news for the distillery industry. So I'm happy. I don't know what.
Yeah, he's a happy man. He looks a little bit like Santa Claus. He's just quite jovial. I'm a little grumpier, probably a little more pessimistic. I see a lot of new distilleries, quite young, a little bit of financial pressure. They produce a great first release. And as Bill has said, consistency of quality is important if you want to maintain your position in the market. And there has been a number of new distilleries have great first releases, as you would expect. Your first release is going to be great, but they're not established like Larks are established with mature supplies of whiskey. They've got limited supply, but because they need cash flow, they are producing whiskies that are not as good a quality as the first, and they are still charging high prices. And if you are a new distillery starting off, that's one way to damage your brand. High price, inconsistent quality, and that's what we have seen with a number of smaller distilleries. The other thing with the smaller distilleries, we have a lot that are of the same age, and they will be producing a similar style or similar age product going to a similar position on the market shelf. It's going to get a little crowded. Gin is crowded at the moment. And so you're going to have to, and as Bill said, what this market correction will mean is that it'll force people to produce a consistent quality product at a reasonable price, and they will maintain their position. Anybody who doesn't do that will not be in the game for that long.
No, and that's good news for everyone, Tim, really. And I think...
Except the person who's not going to make it. But anyway.
Well, yeah, but I see what you're saying, and there has been that case where some people have been required to sell their whiskey a bit early because of cash flow. I'll put my hand on my heart and say now, Lynn and I did the same thing when we started releasing our whiskey. I think it was too young. People told us it was great and they wanted to buy it and drink it. And because we were back there in the early days, we could just sort of wait our time eventually and make sure we came out with good whiskey on the market. Not to say the whiskey was bad, but we had the luxury of having a bit of time on our side to be able to improve it. But I think people have learned, have seen those distilleries starting up and perhaps being having to release their whiskies too soon, are now knowing they just can't afford to do that. If you're going to start up a distillery, you're coming into the industry now, or your whiskey's about to come online, I think most people have realised they're going to have to leave it in a barrel till it's ready and make sure that it's of the highest quality. Right? Look, I just see a lot of positives out of this, Tim. Yep, there's been mistakes made. Sure, we're a young industry.
I still think mistakes will be made. And I just recently I've had some whiskey presented to me from an outlet that has the characteristics of something that still had a good base, but it was just too young. And I think some people do forget that part of whiskey production is time. And,
but they'll learn, Tim. They'll learn that they can't get away with it. And the market won't let them get away with it.
No, that's exactly right. The market will decide.
Yeah, I think that's a positive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting point. I mean, I want to touch upon what you said, Bill, in that this is not a bad thing that there's more distilleries on here. I mean, I can remember 5 years ago, we're not talking about a long time ago, where leading into Christmas one year here at the Oak Barrel, I had 3 Australian whiskies on the shelf, and that was all I could get, pretty much. There was a Starward, I think I had 1 Lark, and I think it was a Belgrove. I couldn't even get lime burners at the time, So it's good. This is not a bad thing that we have these offers. But do you think maybe, if I'm sitting in Tasmania at the moment and I've want to start a distillery, I mean, personally, I don't. It sounds like way too hard work for an attention span that I don't have. But, how much different is the business plan need to be now than it was, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago? So it's like people it must be like a really robust business plan to throw a lot of money at this now.
Oh, sure. And I think they get that advice from those of us that have been in the industry a little while. We just had Whisky Week here in Tasmania. We had a whiskey showcase on the last day of the Whisky Week. We were expecting to get a lot of mainland visitors. Of course, that didn't happen. But the numbers were taken up by local people. The local market is a sophisticated whiskey market these days. We had 32 presenters at the Whisky Showcase. They're all doing really well. They were all selling their product. They all had a great week. And they all learn from each other. And it's a good chance for the distilleries themselves to get around and see what they need to be producing. But yeah, look, it's quite exciting. And I think because we had 32 distilleries presenting, they had big crowds, both sessions for the showcase. You've seen it at your Oak Barrel when we were allowed to come up, when you let us back up.
We don't want to go back up.
Yeah. We've been making a lot of jokes about how I'm not allowed to come down. Let's not forget there's no guarantees I'll let you back into my city.
Hey, I'm happy with that. At the moment. Hey, Billy, one thing that we probably should... Scotty was talking about rules and regulations and things like that for the industry. Sure. Yeah, there's certainly been some significant changes in the last couple of years due to a few work health and safety issues, a few electrical supply issues to stills, storage issues. With any new industry, the rules and regulations will change as it progresses. And I think we are seeing it now, not from a competition point of view, but from a regulatory point of view. It is getting more difficult to get a license. You want to have a crack at that?
Oh, sure. Look, when Lynn and I got the license 29 years ago, I remember going to the workplace standards people and saying, do you want to come and have a look and see if we need to do anything? And they go, no, we don't know. It looks like they did come and have a look and they said, yeah, everything looks all right. We went to the health department and said, what have we got to do? And they said, no, you're fine. Went to the fires people. They came and had a look and they said, oh, look, if anything, you got too many fire extinguishers. Nobody knew what to do back then. but as Tim said, things have changed dramatically. With so many distilleries, it's made councils nervous. It's made regulatory authorities nervous, and they are making it harder and harder, which is all a good thing. I mean, we all know Adams had a problem, and one of their staff members was injured, and in fact they lost their distilling building in a fire. And nobody wants that to happen. Nobody wants that for our staff. We all want to come to work. We all want to go home. We all want to do it safely. So whilst I sort of look back and think, gosh, we were kind of lucky that no one cared about us, I actually think it's a good thing that people do care about us. But that's going to make it a lot harder than it did for Lynn and I to enter the market, to enter the industry. But that's not a bad thing. I think you need to be serious about this now if you're coming into the distilling industry. You need to think very carefully about all these issues of safety requirements, and so there'll be a cost to that. But as long as you're aware of it, there are people coming into Tasmania and starting new distilleries. That's happening across Australia.
That's a really interesting point, Bill. There was a question I was going to bring up later from, I believe it was Tom Scott, saying how has recovery gone since Adams had that disaster, and thank God it wasn't worse than it was. But we know that WorkSafe are running around and taking a look at things a lot at the moment. Not because I'm down there, but because they've written about it and they've spoken about it prior to that, as well as new distilleries. Is there a risk that some established distilleries could come under the radar there a little bit?
Oh, yeah, one by one, they're going to every established distillery in Tasmania, and they're pretty tough. A number of distilleries have been told to cease operation until you fix this or you fix that. So WorkSafe are ceasing distilling operations at certain distilleries until they fork out and put in fire escapes or drainage or whatever it might be. Proper ventilation or bunding or safety electrical items, ethanol meters, and
still proximity to stored barrels and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, look, I think we've been lucky to date, apart from poor old Adams, but it's been a timely reminder to us all to get it right. So yeah, they are going. Each distillery will get a visit from WorkSafe standards to make sure you comply. So new distilleries, you'll understand what you need to do. Existing distilleries, I don't think anybody's nervous about it, but they know, and nothing is impossible to fix. There's an answer to all the issues that are coming up. People are just going to have to sort of be prepared for it.
Yeah, 100%. And as I said, or as you said, it's a wake-up call. But thank God it wasn't worse than what it was.
Sure.
Which is great because the history of distilling whiskey anywhere in the world is one that is riddled with fires. Unfortunately, it's quite yeah. I want to just do a quick shout out, a bit of housekeeping. On this episode of Grumpy Old Men, we do have a tendency to go down rabbit holes and things. So feel free. It's not going to be a very strict tasting tonight. But I want to just jump in onto this whiskey, which I'm trying at the moment, the Larks Symphony. Tim, what you wanted to put together this tasting based around a little bit of blending or vatting. So still, sometimes single malts, sometimes blends, but things that are brought together. And we've seen in Tassie a lot of single cask, single malt releases in the formative years. Are we moving away from that? And it's been the thing without prompting it in the past 2 nights of talking to Aussie distillers. It's been a bit of the buzzword of, blending things together is really, really important. So, I mean, is that what, for someone who's started out on single casks and are moving away from that a little bit, is that what you're seeing?
Look, I think it's a size thing too. There were limited casks, there were limited opportunities to produce whiskey. We were still learning. We're learning every single day with our short history in Tasmania. And blending is just one of those evolutionary steps. Now, Larks or Sullivan's Cove or some of the larger distilleries, well-established distilleries now have good quality, mature stock, and not every single cask is great. I have decanted here recently 20 casks, There were 3 that were good enough. 3, there we go, 3 that were good enough as single cask, single malts. 11 of them were blended, and the remaining 6 were rubbish. And they've gone back into other first fills. Quite often with larger distilleries, any that are not so good can be blended out and hidden. I mean, I'm still a small operation. I can't do that. But if you have a large distillery, as they do in Scotland, and as will be the tendency here with Lark and with Carrington, Mill at Oatlands, things like that, they'll have large volumes. They will do internal blending to do their stock standard whiskey because, that's what is done to produce a consistent product.
Well, I don't know that it's just about consistency, Tim. I think when Lynn and I started, we had the luxury of releasing, and that was a big part of our sales pitch, a single brew, single distillation, double distillation, 1 cask, and released as a single cask. And we could do that. But over time, it just became impossible to sell everything we had as a single cask release. So we were still having single cask releases, but more and more we had to marry a number of casks together just because of the logistics of having a release. When, a release of, say, Glenfiddich 12-year-old, I know, talking to the boys over there, that they will pull out 400 odd barrels from their bond store, and they might they'll look at them all, and they might leave out several barrels, but they'll then marry all of those to get a release of 12-year-old single malt. With all of their whiskies, it's just impossible for a distillery as it grows to release everything as single cask. So as a distillery grows, they do that, and they make sure, though, that when they release it, like Lark does, that it's a bloody good whiskey. And I can put my hand on my heart and say every whiskey they release is a bloody ripper whiskey. The great news for the consumer is, with all of these smaller distilleries that has the luxury to release a lot of single casks, there'll be some wonderful single cask whiskies coming out of Tasmania forever and a day. That's terrific news. There's room for the bigger distilleries to grow and to marry their whiskies, to blend, if you like. And there's great news for the smaller distilleries that can still produce a great number of single cask whiskey. This bloody term, Scotty, blend, I think the Scots haven't done themselves any favour. When I grew up in this industry, if you married a lot of single malts together, it was called a vatted malt. Now when people do that, you've got to call it a blend. I always thought of a blend as a mixture of grain, spirit, and
a blended malt whiskey, it's called, not a vatted malt.
But people shorten it and call it. I never know what they're talking about these days when they talk about a blend.
Yeah.
I refer to a marriage of barrels or a vatted malt or something like that.
Well, it is one of those tricky things because it is the even if you're making a single malt by vatting casting, it's still the skill of blending. It's also but also the Scotch have also taken the word malt and applied it exclusively to barley, when you can malt a lot of different types of grain. And so in Australia, what does the single malt mean? If you've malted a grain, does it need to be barley?
No, you're quite right. Yep.
Yeah.
I know Peter Bignell would love to discuss this issue.
That sort of sums up what this whiskey is, though, because I remember Lark, being one of the first distilleries to push through, start getting stocked at bars and appear on bar menus and that sort of stuff. You can't do that for particularly big bars that, like, if it's a Whisk and Almond or an Elysian or something like that, or Baxter Inn, you can list every single cask known to man. But in bars that don't have an exclusive whiskey focus, you need something that you can buy month in, month out, and that's going to taste the same month in, month out, which I know, Bill, that wasn't the case for Lark for a long time. And I think this is where the Symphony, which is, it's, what do we call this, a Tasmanian malt whiskey. So the first blended malt from the House of Lark. So we can sort of deduct from that it's coming from a few sources. But is this what this whiskey was sort of developed to counteract?
I think it just came about because all of a sudden the company Lark found itself owning a number of distilleries and a number of barrels from those distilleries. And it had the opportunity to marry whiskey from these different distilleries. For Lynn and I, we didn't have that when we were in control. We just had the Lark whiskey. So It's. I never thought there'd be a day where we would even think about looking at that sort of thing, or maybe in collaboration with another distillery we might have. But look, it just came at an opportune time. There was a greater demand for Lark whiskey. Lark found itself owning barrels from a number of distilleries, and that they own, and it seemed a logical progression. So they've got a good team down there that really know how to put the marriage of whiskies together to produce something a bit like Glenfiddich does, that time and time again it'll be recognised as their house style.
One of the greatest skills at a major distillery is the blender who can take 400 casks, as Bill said, make a 12-year-old Glenlivet, and he makes it the same as the Glenlivet 12 months ago from another 400 casks. That is a true skill. That's the true master blender, and that is. He recreates the house style of that distillery, and he does it year after year after year. True skill.
Yep. Yeah, because it was, as you mentioned, Scotty, it was a bit of an issue for Lynn and I. And if you've got any of those earlier bottles of ours, I used to say on the back label that each release of our whiskey will be different from the last one.
Yep.
We were discovering and learning, and we saw that as a plus for the market too, to learn along with us, to enjoy our experimenting with different barrel types, different yeast regimes. That was in the old days. So as Lark has grown, it's not able to do that so much, and it's able to now produce consistent whiskies. But it still has, as you know, Scotty, a number of special releases, limited releases throughout the year. Some people might say too many, but the market seems to be loving all of that and lapping it up. And for a small distillery starting up, they might choose to go down the path of having many different releases for a long time yet, because they can sell everything either online or through their cellar door, and it's not an issue. So lots of opportunities out there.
I'm just going to throw another little thing in here. You've got to congratulate Lynn and Bill, because next year is 30 years since the industry started in Australia. And now there's I don't know how many distilleries, there'd probably be close to 300 now.
Oh, over 300.
Yeah, that would not have existed without Lynn and Bill. And, it's you don't often get to talk to somebody like Bill and Lynn that started off an industry in a country. That's fantastic. And the evolution of the industry over 30 years, we're still evolving, we're still changing. But it was a beautiful base to start with, and I'm going to say thank you to Lynn and Bill for starting off an industry in Australia. Fantastic.
Well, and I might add to that, particularly Lynn, who was in the background just before we went live there, because I know Bill does take a lot of this credit, and he's the front man of the band, so to speak. But once you get to know both Bill and Lynn, you realise who was really making the tough calls and getting stuff done, and probably making some very smart calls.
I try to recognise Lynn as much as I can. Lynn's actually, you were lucky to see her on the screen. She's very shy normally from this sort of thing. But look, it was absolutely Lynn and myself. But I just like to say, Tim, thank you. But we just happened to be there at the beginning. And I know people sort of refer to us as sort of being responsible for starting the industry. But the industry isn't there just because of Lynn and I. It's there because of every single distillery that's come along since and done the right thing. There's some fantastic people in our industry. And I remember when I got asked to be entered into the Whiskey Hall of Fame, and I stood up and said, look, you're only asking me because I've been around too long now, and I'm the godfather, or I'm a grumpy old man, or whatever. But I'm only here because we've had a large number of terrific people enter this industry and create great whiskies. And so that's why our industry is growing. So many people have come on board and adopted this philosophy of, if we're going to make whiskey, let's make great whiskey. So I take my hat off to the whole rest of the industry for being part of that and creating the wonderful thing we have happening for us now, the Australian whiskey scene. Credit to everyone.
I got in trouble once, Bill, and I said that Lynn Lark was the engine of
Yeah.
Larks, and you were the hood ornament. And I've got
That's true. That's true.
Yep. Anyway,
Well, it's a couple of things there that I want to good to move on, but just to put things in perspective. Obviously, the Lark, or the House of Lark, as they're calling themselves, bears your and Lynn's name. What is, just very clearly, what is your actual relationship with that company now, Bill?
Yeah, okay. So Lynn and I sold down to a lot of people that were interested in becoming part of our distillery many years ago, good friends. That all changed for Lynn and I in 2013. But I wasn't ready to walk away from Lark or the industry so much. So I wrote my own business card as the global brand ambassador. And I've maintained that business card right till today. And so my involvement is one of representing the brand, which gives me an opportunity to represent the industry as well. So, look, Lark's a big company now. It employs 68 people, some great people. The demand for Lark whiskey seems to be growing strongly. But I can put my hand on my heart as their brand ambassador and say, this mightn't be the way that Lynn and I would have done it. We'd never anticipated Lark could grow the way it has. But hand on heart, the bloody whiskies are great. The people are good. There's some things happening which will challenge the industry a bit, challenge people's perception of what should happen. But this is now time for the industry to sit down and make some rules about what we want to see happen into the future. My involvement is, I don't get involved in any of that. I'm simply proud to be their brand ambassador because they're putting out bloody good whiskies. The company's employing a lot of people. It's putting Australian whiskey on the map. So I try to influence a few things as a brand ambassador, and I've had a bit of success there. I'm just happy to stay at that level, Scotty.
Yeah, beauty. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because I know it can be a little bit difficult for people sometimes, to see who's actually working. But let's move on to the next whiskey. We're just moving purely in ABV now to Remnant the Scoundrel. And this one is all about blending. And I was actually on the phone to Heather, now distillery manager at Sullivan's Cove this morning, sort of planning out what we're doing on Friday. And that is going to be an absolute joy. If that Matt Bailey says you're enjoying this chat with a couple of old farts here, Friday nights is going to be excellent. And what we were sort of talking about is that divide of skills in a distillery. Bill, when you started, it was yourself and Lynn.
Yep.
But I think you'd probably be the first to admit, if you are the world's best distiller, you may not be the world's best blender, let alone graphic designer, let alone distributor, let alone, cleaner or front of house or anything like that. How important is that now, and how it relates to these whiskies, the Remnant, which is driven by Peter Bignell, but he's got people working with him on this as well.
How important? Gosh,
or just maybe to even identify the fact that blending and distilling vatting and distilling, whatever way you want to put it, are two very different things and can be very good for different people.
Yeah, look, we've kind of talked around this issue a lot before, and talking about anything that Peter Bignell does is, you need a fair bit of time. We love Peter Bignell to bits because he is the true innovator. He's the Gyro Gearless of whiskey. He's Mr. Gadget Man. I think actually Peter does a lot of this on his own. He's quite a clever bloke in a lot of respects. He's not just a whiskey maker. He's an ice sculptor. If you've ever seen any of his sand sculpting, he's bloody one of the top sand sculptors in the world. Look, I don't know where you want to go with this question, Scotty.
Just like maybe in sort of, are you seeing now with some of these new distilleries come through, is there a heightened emphasis on the vatting skills as being core to the distillery's success?
Yeah, but I think a number of the distilleries that I know, the small ones, they're doing just as good a job on their own without any help from anybody if they've got the right sort of palate and the right passion about what they're doing, as the bigger distilleries that have teams of blenders and teams of marketing people and teams of designers and things like that. There's some great, just right around the country, there's some great people doing wonderful things just in-house and with their own initiative, their own drive, their own passion and their own skills. I'm not quite sure where you want to take that. But,
that's an economy of scale. Once you start to gear up and become more and more commercial, there are specific roles for individuals within that company, and we are seeing those roles being promoted within an organisation. And so, but the smaller ones, even with us here, we're still very, very small. But you see with Larks, as Bill said, they're employing a large number of people. They've got distillers, they've got marketers, they've got packers, they've got bond store, whatever, warehousemen, whatever you call them. And with the smaller distilleries, though, I mean, all of that is done in-house until such time as they become more commercial. And there are distinct roles in the industry, and I think as the industry ages within Australia, those positions will end up being transferable from one distillery to another. So you are a blender, you do distillation, and they become a career path. And I think we'll see more and more of it now. But as we've got small distilleries and large distilleries, it's a mixed bag. The smaller ones are going to do everything in-house. The larger ones are going to have a greater variety of personnel to do these roles. But as I say, they will then become careers, and we'll see them transfer from one distillery to another once the distilleries get larger.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's take a look at this whiskey then. Remnant. Which is it's not we're talking about Peter Bignell from the Belgrove Distillery. This is not Belgrove. This is essentially a label set up to vat together casks from another distillery. I know both of you have been very close to this project in all its forms, prior to that. And I want to echo something from Matt Bailey saying, big ups to people taking on that remnant stock. Avoiding, the hints in the name a little bit. And from a base level, I think it is really admirable that from quite a shitty situation, some great whiskies coming from it, because we knew the great stock was there.
It was
how do you guys see it?
Yeah, look, you're right. But that distillery was always capable of producing and always had been producing some pretty good whiskies. So it's just there were some other problems that we all know about. But look, it's a great thing for Pete. He's helped a lot of people out by taking on these barrels, and I think pretty clever naming of the whiskey, and it's a bloody good whiskey. And like as Matt Bailey said, it's a big shout out to Peter for putting it together.
He gave people an option where a lot didn't have that. When this first arose, and we won't talk about the history, but he gave people an option. He would buy some of the barrels off them if they wanted that. He offered to store the barrels until people made up their mind. He offered to bottle and label if people wanted to do some of their releases privately. So he's done a great thing for the industry, which, the situation sucked there for a lot of people. And he's given them an option and out. So he's a good man for doing that. And this is just, this product is still a single malt, I think, from a vat of single malt whiskies from. Look, I'm going to say it, the Nant Distillery, for crying out loud, and he's put it together to produce, a good whiskey.
Yep, as somebody said, a cracking dram, fantastic value, and it is.
Yep.
Yeah, and a big shout out to Dan Mathers as well from the Queensland Malt Whisky Society tuning in. He actually made a comment I wanted to bring up a little while ago that says, at the Queensland Malt Whisky Society, they said last week that we could organise an Australian whisky tasting each month and still not get to try every new release, which is sometimes, people who used to pride themselves on trying everything can be a bad thing, but that's an incredibly exciting concept that, we love whiskey for the discovery, and now in Australian whiskey, there's always going to be something more for eternity.
Can I just say Tim and I are both members of one of the oldest whisky clubs outside of Scotland, the Gillies Club. And I know you've probably got quite a few people linking in tonight that are members of the Gillies Club across Australia. And its origin started in as the single malt whisky category grew back in the 70s and 80s. It was primarily to enjoy Scottish single malts. And up until now, primarily, that's pretty much all we've ever done, with an occasional Australian whisky. But I can tell you the very next meeting of the Gillies Club in Tasmania, there will be no Scottish single malts, no Japanese single malts. It will be 100% Tasmanian single malts. First time ever.
Yeah, wow. That's pretty big. And to put in perspective, Gillies Club is probably almost certainly responsible for releases like the Black Bamor and like a little club in Sydney has had a huge impact on whiskey globally, and some might consider it to be actually the oldest single malt whiskey club in the world, because every other club was doing blends as well in the 70s and 80s. So still haven't got my invite to be a member, but that's all right. Don't worry about it. That's I probably can't afford the fees anyway, so don't worry about it. Look, this guy. I want to bring up quite a good comment here from James McLeod, saying, the Remnant has a certain swashbuckling charm. And Tim, I want to throw something to you. We had Barrel Whiskey on last week, which is an American company that, not a distillery, but they find casks and match spirit a little bit like you do, but they're using like traditional casks, but pear brandy casks and Sicilian Amaro casks. And he was of the opinion that single casks can be great, but if you truly make a really great blend, it's always going to have a little bit more complexity than you can get out of a single cask if you do it correctly. I mean, Tim, you've been moving into things, and I love that sort of that sentiment of a swashbuckling charm. Is that how you're sort of seeing your Heartwood and TIB creations? Is that you can create something that's more than the sum of its parts?
Certainly. I don't want people to know this, but I'll let you all in on a secret. We make a lot of stuff up as we go along. And there was a whiskey we called the Beagle. Yeah. And I think Billy might have even come up with a name, which was named after Charles Darwin's ship, the Beagle, Voyage of Discovery and the Evolution of Whiskey. And there's a photo of Chris Thompson, the head distiller at Larks, and Bill and myself standing beside a blue plastic tub, chucking all of my whiskies into the tub, not theirs, but my whiskies into a tub to see what we'd get. And again, we've had to learn about blending. And yes, we are a little bit random in the way we think with some of the whiskies that we produce. But what we do, we learn from that. And so there have been whiskies like the Witch's Cauldron that we've done. We've actually crafted whiskies based on what we've learnt as well. So, and you can improve whiskey by blending. We often use bourbon for the front end, port and sherry for the middle, and peat for the tail. You know, we've talked about the Brontosaurus and in the past, and that's what we try and create in terms of mouthfeel for our whiskey, and we often find that we can increase complexity, and we can improve texture, we can improve length by blending, and there are advantages to blending. But then that doesn't say that there isn't a single malt, single cask out there that is just stunning. I usually say it's about, 1 in 10, 1 in 20 doesn't need some sort of intervention where all of the rest do. But blending together certainly can improve a whiskey. And we had 9 casks yesterday. So Louis was down here helping me. He's the grunt, and he came up with an idea. We were going to do a Solera, but then he decided that it's probably a better idea to take these whiskies, which tasted quite good, but they were like every other Australian whiskey on the market. And we're going to blend these 720 litres together. And then once we've done that, we're going to divide it up into an old first fill port cask, an even older Topate cask, and then a high quality bourbon cask. Hey, Lynn.
Do you know where
Lynn's
Lynn's just been?
Yeah. Hello.
She's been to the bathroom, but you know what she's got in the bathroom at the moment? She's actually
Oh,
distilling
I
some.
whiskey from you.
She's distilling some seawater and seaweed right now
Oh, nice.
in her botanical still. She's got a little botanical still in there. She's wants to produce a spirit of the sea. As you know, Jack's got his show, The Old Man and the Old Moon, and he needed the scent. As people come into the theatre, they needed a scent of the sea. So they'll be spraying this spirit that Lynn's making. So she's been sitting out there with a still, distilling seawater and seaweed.
Oh, cool.
I don't doubt that for a second. That is what's going on.
It's true. Smelling good.
Yeah.
Smelling great. See you all.
See you later.
No.
But yes, you can produce a whiskey that is greater than the sum of its parts.
You can.
You can.
Thanks to it, like there's a few questions coming through on the chat, and if I haven't brought it up yet, I will before the end of the tasting. I haven't forgotten about them, but lovely to see Lynn there. But on that note, let's move into this whiskey, the Country to Coast, which is a blended malt whiskey from the Blackgate Distillery out in central west New South Wales and Fleurieu in sort of the Goolwa Peninsula. Fleurieu Peninsula, but Goolwa in South Australia. Two distilleries that I believe make exceptional single malt whiskies and are certainly stars of this next phase of whiskies coming through, or sort of that middle phase, depending on how you want to sort of frame it. Tim, this was something that you wanted to put on tonight. It's not a Tasmanian whiskey. But what was it about this that sort of prompted you to put this on?
Well, it's good. You got to have that. But I think a collaboration between distilleries in different states to produce a vatted malt, a peated vatted malt, it would have been. Look, I consider this again another evolutionary step in the industry where you have characters of different whiskies. You add those characters together, and you get something better than the original two. And the great thing about it is, too, it's a collaboration between states, between South Australia and people from New South Wales, between Gareth and Brian, and, producing a good quality drink. And, my hat goes out to them, whatever the expression is. But, yeah.
Don't
My hat goes out to them.
Don't take your hat off, please, Tim. Leave your hat on.
Yeah, I know.
Speaking of which, giving your hat to people, we are giving away a Heartwood hoodie later on tonight, which I've forgotten to mention, that I'm going to do by a very unscientific draw a little bit later on tonight, just for a bit of fun. But, I noticed that, they went for two mainland distilleries. No one's been kind enough to reach out to a Tasmanian distillery yet. Is this happening in Tassie? Are distilleries collaborating like this? Do you know of anything in the works?
I don't know. Billy?
Not that I'm aware of, Scotty, no.
There has been Tasmanian blends for Tas Whisky Week in the past, hasn't there, though?
Oh, yeah, we did that. That's correct.
That's it.
Those crazy boys in Adelaide were coming up with an idea of what they want to call it, a triptych whiskey. So whiskies from South Australia, I think Schmitty, we were going to let him contribute, and Lark, and there was somebody else that it was Craig. What was his? Craig Daniels was looking at putting
the Malt Maniac.
The Malt Maniacs. Yeah, they were looking at doing something called the triptych once upon a time, but it sadly never came about. But I'm sure we'll see the success of this Country to Coast. I'm sure, and that'll, I think, encourage other people to have a bit of a go.
Yep. I mean, as you know, we do that all the time. We've got whiskey from New Zealand and Fleurieu and New South Wales here, and we have used those in blends with Tasmanian whiskey.
Well, of course, yeah.
Yeah, but we've been doing it for quite a long time, but that's what we do, I suppose.
Yeah, no, sorry, Tim. Of course you do. Yeah.
We forgot about you there, mate.
Yeah.
Do you even make whiskey?
I understand it.
Just to sort of put this in perspective for those who did get the packet and drinking along with this one, this was 2 casks. So it was an Apera cask with peated spirit from Blackgate, and then a tawny cask with peated spirit from Fleurieu that were blended together by Gareth and Angela at Fleurieu. So this is there's only 300 bottles of this release, and this is batch 2 of Country to Coast. It is quite a small sample size, but it's bloody delicious. I think, I'm going to throw this into another question. The hints in the name, Country to Coast. Fleurieu is by the sea. Blackgate is in a paddock, an emu paddock, essentially out near Dubbo. The differences in climate and temperature change are similar, but they're very different places, and yet it's quintessentially Australian when you marry them together. I mean, Bill, does Australia have? Is there an Australian flavour to whiskey? And I'll throw this to you as well, Tim.
Well, I think there is, Scotty. I think we're starting to be able to identify ourselves as a kind of a common golden thread that goes through Australian whiskies. And I think some of that has to do with the climate. Some of it has to do with the barleys we're growing out here. And the techniques that we've sort of adopted in small cask aging, all of those things contribute to producing a style that is, predominantly Australian. Ultimately, our whiskies have to be like Scotland in that we use malted barley, yeast and water. Same sort of thing. So there's got to be some similarities too. But back in 2009, when Lynn and I won an award for LD 100 in the World Whisky Awards, the judges came up to us afterwards and said, "Congratulations, what are you buggers doing down there? How can you produce a whiskey like this?" And we talked about it and identified the fact that our climate is a little bit different in our diurnal range of temperatures and seasonal variations, which happen much more quickly down here, down under. The fact that most of us are using primarily a brewing barley rather than a barley that was grown specifically for the distilling industry. So typically in Australia, we get less return of alcohol per tonne of barley than they do in other whiskey producing regions.
At 25% different.
Yeah, so those sorts of things I think do contribute to a flavour profile that is coming out of Australian whiskies, which I think, one day in a blind tasting, people will be able to recognise the difference. It's subtle, but I think there is a difference developing.
Yeah. Tim, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with what Bill said. I think the other exciting thing is, though, we are probably not limited by the rules that they are in Scotland, and we'll see people doing sour mash. We'll see Damien Mackey, he's doing triple distillation. And so, yes, there is a commonality between a lot of the whiskies, but also, though, there's an opportunity in Australia to produce a lot of different style whiskies as well. And so I think, I don't actually know where I'm going with this, but we can produce a greater range of product in this country, as well as producing a lot of malt whiskies that are of a similar Australian characteristic, if you like, that you were talking about.
Mm.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, first and foremost, this is bloody delicious, which is the most important thing.
Yep.
Two great distilleries, two great couples producing great spirits, and a terrific collaboration for Australia. Great to see.
Yeah. And I want to shout out to Mick Sheard, who says, "I love Blackgate. Awesome work, Mick Sheard from the Imbue Distillery, a little bit north of Melbourne there.
Yep.
Making gin." So I mean, just before we move on, there's a bunch of questions coming through, so I'm trying to make them all. But Dan Milne just comes in and says, "Do you see similarities between Australia and the emerging US single malt scene?" And I'm going to rephrase that a little bit. Like we see it, like Westwood. He talks there about their craft beer. We are Westwood's biggest export market from a distillery in Portland, Oregon, because they're from a craft beer town. They do a lot. They're making a single malt, but they're talking a lot about yeast and fermentation. Do you think that Australia has a big export market in America, perhaps maybe more so than Europe, because of similarities in what we're doing, or are they? Do you think Europe is probably a bigger export market for those boys at the big end of town that are going to start dealing with that?
Oh, look, I'm pretty sure the American market is really looking forward to the day that we will be expanding into the US. Lynn and I started exporting to the US, over 10 years ago now. The only reason we stopped was we just simply didn't have enough whiskey to keep up. to the demand for our whiskey. There's a lot of competition over there, but there's a lot of thirsty drinkers over there as well. And their craft whiskey industry is probably 10 years behind ours, but it's happening very, very quickly, as you could imagine, because of the sheer numbers of people over there. I remember going and visiting Westwood Distillery with David Vitale. Gosh, it would have been 2008. Westwood, they were in a little pub in Portland. And it was you had to trip over cardboard boxes to get to the still and fight for a little spot on the bar. And it's terrific to see the way they've really grown. Yeah, look, I'm sure there is a market for Australian whiskies in America. Having been over there and seen their reaction to our whiskies, they loved our whiskies. It's a difficult market to get into. Each state has its own set of regulations. It's not easy to find a person or a distribution company that can import the product and then distribute it amongst the states. That's a real challenge for us. But I know the people are up for it. They love our whiskey. They'd love to see more of it. It'll be a long time before, though, that we really do grow into the American market. I think it'll be a lot easier for us to grow into the European market and even the Asian market, probably before we grow into the American market.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's move into our next whiskey of the night to keep that chugging along. I know it's a little bit different doing this virtually. As you know, Tim, having done many tastings here over the years, if people, you don't give them permission to start drinking, they start throwing things at you. So I'm hoping they're not breaking glasses at home wherever they are throwing things around. But let's move on to the first of the Tasmanian independent bottler releases, which I think, and just by virtue of being slightly less ABV, we'll start with the Vatted Malt, TIB vatting number 5, which is 50.3%. We'll get onto the blend, which is 50.4 in a second. Tim, you're selling everything in Australia, presumably, at the moment?
Yes, mate. Yes, we the last 3 months, we ran out of whiskey 3 times. So Louis and I have put our heads together and produced quite a bit. And you can't see beside me, but maybe hang on. Let's see what happens without me breaking stuff. Here we go. Look, can you see all those packages?
Yeah, so that's the oak barrel allocation. What's available for?
Yes, yeah, good on you. You can sell those. No, we are selling everything we make in Australia. We have been very, very fortunate, even through COVID. We've always had an online presence, and we've got a strong following, and we've had a very, very good run over the last 12 to 18 months. And as you say, yeah, selling everything in Australia.
Yeah. So, I mean, this whiskey is Tasmanian independent bottlers. I might say TIB because it's a little bit easier to say. That's fine, Bill. When we first spoke about TIB when it launched, it was about being a little bit more approachable, a little bit softer. You know, and Heartwood was that all guns blazing dinosaur palate thing. Very, very quickly, the TIBs moved from 45%-ish to now 50% and above. So from your point of view, like what is still the difference between TIB and Heartwood in terms of?
Okay, how the story started off, there was an article written about us in London in 2014, and the article said, Heartwood, you'll either love it or you'll hate it, but you'll never forget it. And I went, yes. But one of the things that we did in 2015 was start Tasmanian independent bottlers to provide something that appeals to a greater spectrum of palates, if you like, and is not so in your face, because some of those high ABVs like 73.5%, 70% are a little bit of a shock to a lot of people. So we decided that we would use what we'd learnt with Heartwood and try and create a whiskey that was of lesser strength and, as I say, a greater appeal. The original business model was 45%, but what we started doing, every individual TIB release, we now break it down into certain percentages look at those certain percentages and look for the sweet spot for that whiskey. And then we bottle it at that sweet spot. There are other things we do, but we think that we believe that every whiskey, every cask has its own sweet spot if you're breaking it down. And so with a recent Launceston distillery up, the sweet spot for that was 41.1%. And for these that you've got in front of you are both around 50%. So we're finding different distilleries, the sweet spot for an individual whiskey varies from one distillery to another. But we break it down to find the sweet spot. So there you go.
Yeah, okay. Great. So this is the Vatted Malt. So I'm just going to read from the label and then you can decipher that for me. So cask number TIB 64, 46 and 47.
Yeah.
That were port, Apera and sherry. So I'm going to presume Australian Apera and then internet proper sherry there as well.
Yeah, Spanish.
Spanish sherry. So, this is Vatted Malt whiskey. So I'm going to assume all single malt stock, but from more than one distillery. Three separate distilleries. Do you want us? And I'm not going to say whether you're open to telling us, but are you just hoping that this stands by itself as a whiskey, as opposed to people like looking for certain distillery names? Is this just a whiskey purely of flavour?
If we have an aim, we want Heartwood and TIB to be recognised as just producing a good drink, regardless of the name of the distillery or the distilleries on the label. Distillery releases, even for us, still sell better than the Vatted Malt or the next whiskey, the blend, even though the blend has got rave reviews out of London just recently. Got
some cousins over there, do you? Got some relatives sitting in London?
His mum.
Yeah, no, my mum's in the probe. She's 98. She doesn't drink. That's probably why she's 98. Anyway, so the thing is, distillery names do better. However, we're trying to change that with, we're trying to build the reputation of TIB and Heartwood so they stand alone.
Yeah, good.
Sweet spot, Peter Bignell from Belgrave, who we were talking a little bit about before with his scoundrel remnant. Sweet spot can be as close as 1-2 ABV, and I think you would agree with that there is sometimes sweet spots for things.
I'm going to say to you, it was actually Peter Bignell that pointed it out to me. He had a whiskey one day and he'd broken down, I think, to 46%, one to 47%, the same whiskey, 47% and 48%. And there were three different whiskies, and the 47% was stunning where the other two, and so basically we do a similar thing. I'll share this little secret. Louis again came up with this, where we take 20 mils of whiskey and we'll do 6 or 7 glasses of 20 mils. We then add 1 mil of water to one, 2 mil of water to the other, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we will taste the whiskey. It's only an indicator, okay, because it hasn't really got time to integrate. It probably takes 2 to 3 weeks really to integrate. And then we find what we decide is the sweet spot. We then break it down to the concentration above, and then we wheel it out into temperatures of between 20 and 30 degrees down at our bond store and drive off the remaining ABV until we get to the sweet spot. And that's how we make our TIBs, and that's how we find. And you can see every TIB, the sweet spot or the ABV that we release it at is different.
Yeah, cool. Now, just on this release, it is a vatting. There's 3 casks, and you've just said it's from 3 different distilleries.
Yep. Do
you start with one barrel and then add on flavours onto the top? And is this, the makeup, is this 50%, 25-25 or 33-33-33? How does that process work for you when you're looking to create a vatted malt?
Okay, we'll sit down. Again, we'll have a number of glasses of whiskey sitting in front of us, and we'll probably use a syringe and we will blend and blend and blend until we get the best taste. Simple as that. It's based on our palates.
Yeah. So there's no hard and fast rule about
None at all. None at all. Some, peat maybe up to 5%. If you go more than 5%, you'll start to dominate the other characteristics of the whiskey. Bourbon for the front end. As I said, sherry and port for the middle, and the proportions vary based on. Well, we have 16. We have new make from 16 different distilleries. We have now 23 different styles of new make and 16 barrel types. So there are lots of different flavour profiles there that we blend together just to make a good drink, and it's all done based on the palate.
Yeah, and just looking at this whiskey in isolation, it is a journey.
Yeah.
The nose is slightly different to the palate. I just had a mouthful then. And then the finish just has that little bit of spice that drags it through and, makes that finish nice and long. But I didn't really pick it on the nose or the palate. So there's three quite distinct looking at things. And shout out to Dennis Newstead, who's joining in on the YouTube there. Vatted Batch 3 is still the best to date in his opinion.
Yeah, did very well on the world stakes.
Which is really cool. I mean, do you like? I know when we, Bill, we've had discussions about gin like this, about manufacturing that three process. How often, Tim, do you get a whiskey that doesn't have the nose but has the great palate and finish, or has the great nose but doesn't have the finish? Does that happen often? Yes.
Quite regularly. So one of the whiskies, one of the Heartwoods that we've just finished, no, we've still got a couple of bottles left, was actually a virgin American oak. And we've had it happen in 2 casks. As soon as we open the virgin American oak cask and the whiskey's good, we might use a bit of it for a blend. Both of them took on tannin really, really quickly. And tannin is a characteristic I personally hate. So we decanted the barrel straight away. And there are ways to hide tannin. And I also had a peated Adams, which was in a re-educated second fill. And it was just neutral. And so we took the peated whiskey from the Adams, added it to the virgin American oak whiskey. That diluted the tannin, hid the tannin, and the virgin American oak gave it a vanilla front. So brought the vanillas out where the peat hid the tannins, and that's just by blending and palate. And so we do it very, very regularly to hide or enhance characteristics of our blends.
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to do these ones side by side because I know that you guys who are not in lockdown have things like holidays and retirement to attend to and can't be on streams all night, even though we could potentially speak all night. Getting onto the TIB, the blend, which is the Molten Oat. So, while we're on this train of thought, all of a sudden you're adding another dimension into this process of another grain. So how do you marry old oat and malt? I mean, bourbon figured it out, and rye whiskey. The American whiskey industry is splattered with mixed grains. What's the thought process when you're playing with different types of grains in a blend?
I'd like to say this is an exciting story, but it was just that Louis was taking the piss out of me. I said to Louis, go, he's got a good palate, but just don't tell him. And I said to him, mate, just go and make me a good whiskey. Here's a whole lot of barrels. Just go and let's start working on producing another blend. So off he went. And at the end of the day, we realised that one of the casks we'd used was actually an oat whiskey. So it's just, I'd like to say that we thought about it, but it just worked out a bit random, and based on choosing whiskey from certain barrels, playing with the proportions from those barrels within the mix that we had in front of us. That's how it was generated, nothing more. We didn't actually set out. Well, I didn't set out. He probably did just to annoy me, but I didn't set out to produce a blended whiskey. He did. He did it. So it's all, that whole whiskey is attributed to Louis and Louis's palate and a variety of different casks that he had available.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting. You know, we've spoken about this, particularly with yourself, Bill, about this industry that you started 30 years ago, or the modern Australian whiskey industry was, you know, sort of kick-started 30 years ago. We didn't have a huge amount of residual knowledge hanging around. You know, people who knew how to do this, and you know, you've been a huge part of this, and Tim, now I know you've spoken to a lot of new Tassie distilleries coming through, but it's exciting to see literally a second generation of people coming through with their own ideas and their own knowledge and their, you know, their own ways to do things, which must be, like, I find it incredibly exciting, you know, arguably being part of that second generation of whiskey drinkers, perhaps not whiskey makers, but from your point of view as well.
A lot of the... sorry.
No, I just think it's wonderful to see the second generation coming along. Louis, your son, Jack, my son, my daughter Christy, setting up her own distillery and producing stunning whiskies. And she's doing that without any help from her mum and dad. She's very clever in her own right. It's terrific to be able to sit back after nearly 30 years, Scotty, and see the younger generation, the second generations coming through. And I think certainly the Australian single malt whiskey market has become matured and far more sophisticated. When we started, Lynn and I, it was kind of a novel. You know, I remember people coming in going, "You're not making whiskey, you don't be silly, you know, we don't make whiskey in Australia." We've come from those days to 30 years later. It's an amazingly short period of time with some terrific young distillers around the country, now second generation distillers. And they're more, you know, you called us grumpy old. Somebody said we're old farts. I think Matt Bailey was right. We are a couple of old farts now, and I think it's time for us to sit back. The market's changing.
I want my hoodie back.
The market's changing, and it's time for the younger generation of distillers to meet the needs of the younger market. I think it's...
Now, the other thing I think, Bill, though, the younger generation, it's a different marketing strategy, how they're linked to social media and things like that. It's way beyond us. The other beautiful thing about the younger palates, I've had Louis and a few of his friends and Joey Ty and people like that. And when they describe a whiskey, they describe it based on their experiences. And, you know, they'll talk about kids' lollies and they'll talk about things that I don't understand. And I find that fascinating because I think people like Bill and I, old farts if you like, our minds have been polluted a little bit by all of the events we've ever been to and all the speakers we've ever listened to and you know, all the phrases that are ever used. And I find the new generation coming through, it is really exciting and it's very entertaining. It's very entertaining. And I think a lot of our whiskey sales and gin sales, it's a form of entertainment for people. And that's why it's a younger demographic that are now consuming whiskey and consuming gin and consuming boutique beers. I just love to see it. It's quite exciting, really.
Sure, great times, really good times.
I just want to retire and wander off into the ether somewhere.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to be called an old fart. I'm okay with that.
In 20 years, they'll still wheel you out in a bloody wheelchair for whiskey events, mate.
Oh, I reckon in about 10,000 years there'll be like one of those Futurama heads in a bowl and Bill Lark will be brought out to consult on various things. You know.
No, I'm happy now to leave it to this younger generation. When they wheel me out in a wheelchair, Tim, they'll have to go up the lakes to get me. I'll be up there fishing.
Oh, mate, that'll be disappointing for you. I know how you fish.
You still don't get it, Tim. You still don't get it.
Well, let's keep this fun rolling. And also, I'll just quickly on that blend. I can say from the label, it's Launceston, Old Kempton, Belgrove and Adams Distillery. Yep. 3 of them were sherry cask. 1 of them was a virgin oak. So I dare say the oat might have been virgin oak?
No.
No, okay, well, there you go. Shows what I know.
Virgin oak and the oat came from Belgrove, Beagle. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I've tried a few oat whiskies in my time, and some ones from America particularly that have been pretty average. And I reckon Peter, at least from what I've tried, makes one of the greatest porridge breakfast whiskies
Yep.
in the world with that oat whiskey. So no wonder you've chosen that one. Let's get on to the final whiskey, which is a Heartwood. This one is, hopefully, I haven't checked since we went live, but we were leading with 2 gold medals, the Paralympics medal tally. So Australia was number 1 earlier today. I don't know if it was still the same, but this is Heartwood, not a gold medal, from the Nobby's Paddock Biannual Country Show. Also not a single malt. We've got cast types Tokay, Sherry, Port, Virgin Oak, Virgin AO, American Oak, with a peat brackets. Distilleries Lark, Belgrove, Redlands, Fanny's Bay, and Adams. So 174 bottles of an absolute menagerie of different things. What was the? Tell me a bit about this and why it wasn't a gold medal.
Scotty.
Yeah, come on, Tim.
Okay, look, there are certain aspects of the industry that I get a little bit annoyed about. There are competitions. I'm getting old. You see, this was the part of the grumpy old man tour. There are competitions in the world where you pay an entry fee and every child wins a prize. And, you can get a quadruple gold medal from the United States, or you can go up the Yellow River in China to the Flower Festival and get a gold medal. And there's lots of competitions out there, and a lot of the competitions are actually business enterprises. So they charge an entry fee, they do an assessment, and maybe from the purest point of view, that's a corruption of the soul just a little bit. And so this whiskey was designed just to point that out a little bit, because the next one in the series is called Not a Limited Edition, Just a Good Drink. And then the third one is called None of the Above, where I've gone through marketing material of certain distilleries in Australia and chosen all the things that I put a line through and said that we're not that. So None of the Above is, and so I call this, and one of the things is an exclusive series, but I call this the Irreverent series just to take the piss out of myself as well. So it's a bit of fun, these three whiskies, basically.
Not only can you make a good whiskey, Tim, and you do get gold medals from it, I reckon you should get a gold medal for the names you come up with. I love your names, so I can never do that. You come up with the best names for a whiskey. You should get a gold medal for that.
Yeah, I thought LD100 was a really creative name.
I love the name now, but I always look forward to reading the names of the whiskies on Tim's bottles. They're great.
Yeah, I actually came up with another couple, but we'll keep those for the future. They'll be a surprise. Oh, by the way, I'll show you this. We labelled this today. It's nearly all gone. This is the Beagle 10, right?
10.
Beagle 10, right? Yeah, over here. Yeah, and you'll see an evolutionary progression of man with the ascent of man. This is now Delta COVID aware, Delta strain COVID aware release, and it says on the label, the Beagle 10. This is evolved from 9 casks, 6 Tasmanian distilleries, and the discovery of vaccines. I'm just trying to promote vaccines, and I just have good fun with my labels. But the Beagle series, Billy, that all started with you, and as I said, Chris Thompson a long time ago. We're up to number 10, and they're always Vatted Malts, and they're always the experimental ones where we're trying to learn what to do, and then we learn from that and go and actually craft whiskies later on. So there you go.
I think what you've shown us, Tim, is we've got a lot of exciting things to look forward to for a long time yet. Scotty, you were alluding to that early. I don't think we have to worry for a long, long time.
I'm just excited about the new generations that are coming along. It's good.
It's like that April Fool's joke that goes around every year that says the world's running out of peat, and that there's no more left, and there's only 10 years left of peat left. I think that the same can be applied to Australian whiskey. if you think, and I've tried some excellent Australian whiskies, and Tim, you know quite well that Release the Beast, one of your early releases, I consider to be in my top 3 Australian whiskies of all time. But having tried again on Monday night with Andrew Baker, the DB1, which is now being called Death or Glory, that's which is a release coming out early next year potentially. That is getting into the top 3. So that something needs to fall out of the top 3. And while we've tried a lot of great things, I genuinely think the best is still to come with what we can create in this country, which is very, very special.
I agree. Good on you, Scotty. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
I've got a whiskey I'm not going to share with anybody. It's that good. I'm just going to drink it.
Yeah.
You've tried it, Bill. I know. That's very good. Yeah, I know. And you wanted to buy one. I said no.
It's not too shit house.
No. Thank you. I take that as a compliment. That's a gold medal, you see, from Bill.
Yeah, that's a gold medal.
There you go.
One of my things I'm missing most from Whisky Fair, which is not the lugging things up and down the stairs or cleaning up after everyone, but apart from getting everyone together, we like to print out great quotes about whiskey from people who, philosophers from a previous age, but also just things we've overheard and things from our chat. And I do miss having at the entry to the bathroom, not too shithouse, from Bill, which is one of my favourite ones to print out every year. But look, yeah. As Dennis said, so I'm sure if someone hasn't already, there has to be a whiskey label called Not Too Shithouse, but it would need to be pretty bloody good for it. Look, Tim and Bill, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yes, let's draw a hoodie before I let you go. So I've got this all set up. So for those who were who were lucky enough to buy a pack, I think there was a few different. I'm chucking it straight into one of those number generator things. So I'm just going to bring that up, and we will hit. I've got this all set up, ready to go. Bang. Yep, there we go. Now I apply it to this spreadsheet. This is all very scientific. And please don't come to me with like lottery rules, and there's no lottery auditors here. But we have a Philippa Stevens. Whether you're watching tonight or not, you are the grand owner of a new extra large Heartwood hoodie. Extra large because that's the only one left. And if you happen to be on the slighter side, if you're a smaller or medium generally, you can wear it to bed. Or cut it up into little bits and use it as a throw rug on your couch. So Philippa, I'll send you an email and we'll get your delivery. Well, I've got your delivery address. I'll pass it on to Tim and we can go from there. So congratulations, Philippa.
Congratulations.
Well,
yep.
Look, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. And Tim, in particular, thank you for. I know you love sitting in the Bond store and looking at a computer screen for hours on end, talking to people in Sydney. For continuing this tradition that we set up about 5 or 6 years ago, that I love it. Just picking your brains and seeing where the industries are. And it's been a real journey. Like we were talking about the market correction a few years ago. We were talking about, new make spirit and the cost of that a few years ago. And we're talking about blends a lot tonight. Next year we'll talk about something different. It's fantastic. So thank you for your time. And Bill, I know you've got a hectic schedule fishing and things there, but it's probably a bit dark to go fishing at the moment. So I appreciate you coming in and doing this with us.
No, it's been great, Scotty. Look forward to actually catching up in real time with real people next year.
Well, yes, that's what we said last year, but
I know, but we will. We will.
Yeah.
Terrific. Good on you.
Thank you very much, mate. Take it easy, and this is a bit of a cliche, but stay safe. I think, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria, because we're fine. Yeah.
In Tasmania, to stay safe, you've just got to stay away from Tim's warehouse or his office on a Friday.
Yeah, look, and thank you everyone in the chat there. We'll say goodnight to Facebook and YouTube, and we'll let you get back to your lives. Thank you so much, not only for tonight, but everything you've always done for this industry. And we look forward to, as I say, sharing a dram in person, because I think I owe you guys a few for the last couple of years. So we'll see you all very soon, and we'll be back tomorrow night with our final Aussie Whiskey get-together, the next Brady Bunch collection of Aussie Whiskey panellists, before finishing on Friday with Sullivan's Cove and Heather. And we had a good half an hour conversation this morning, and we got to the end of that conversation and just said we should be recording. Well, I said we should just be recording what you're saying. So that's going to be a fascinating little chat. But we'll see you all very, very soon.
Thanks, Scotty. Everyone, good night.